tell me it's over now. Does a hate inside of me like some kind of master? I try to save you but I can't find the answer. I'm holding on to you, I'll never let go. I need you with me as I enter the shadows.
Isn't it depressing that even after you talked about everything you want to say about media that really gets to you, and yet you still have new things to say about? That just sums up of how Naughty or Nice really showcases of how they couldn't be able to make this movie work even if the other characters took center stage, including Lola and Lynn, but that's not why I'm making another Naughty or Nice video. In my community posts, I stated that making the video centering around Lincoln and Duncan's dynamic along with Lincoln's multi-tour is the main priority, and I was considering on saving this for my Fantasy Elements video in the near future. Well, not really near future, but you know what I mean. But after rewatching clips of this movie, apparently that changed my mind, which really shows that despite some ideals that this movie showcased that could work for its benefit for a little bit, it still doesn't really change the fact that they clearly knew how to make Lincoln's gift a factor for not only for himself, but also literally his family. So let's get this out of the way before we get into the dynamic of Lincoln and Duncan. As much as I understand that really wanting a gift and nothing more during Christmas is considered naughty, and I can understand why people would root against Lincoln for that, but no matter how I look at this movie and how the plot is structured, it's just too difficult to consider it as an issue, judging of how that they are attempting to make Christmas a family thing, which, yes, that's something that you should do in order to make this plot work. But considering I've been thinking about the other problems in this film, specifically the fantasy elements and the database, this just becomes more of an afterthought to the point that it's a reason onto why I didn't remember it in my review and my villains portion of Naughty or Nice. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say they really didn't made the whole Lincoln being into wanting his gift any problematic, because with how terrible and poorly written he was when it comes to attempting to help out his family, when it comes to doing good deeds, and his dialogue, it just feels a little too forced to the point that the people critiquing him, specifically his choices, are just doing their job rather than the movie doing it where we can actually see the rooting against him feeling accurate. I'm just saying right now that when you see Lincoln attempting to do good deeds, not only is it mostly forced and him being put into a position that just feels too difficult to consider his knowledge traits, but honestly, if this movie doesn't even consider his knowledge traits from past episodes in the same veins as his sisters, then that could be another indicator that this shows that this movie's rules of naughty is another indicator that Lincoln's greed towards his gift really failed. Here's the thing when it comes to the Naughty or Nice system in this movie. Like, if you make one decision that could instantly become naughty, which it's one thing when it comes to racism and sexism, but at the same time, when it's literally doing micro decisions, specifically Lincoln giving a cookie to Clyde, or just instantly doing anything that he wasn't aware of, specifically him attempting to do good deeds to get back on the naughty list. This doesn't really give me the indication that Christmas is something that you should do good deeds in favor of gaining the approval of Santa himself. And since that this all ties into Duncan absolving him, it really does show that they couldn't be able to factor in on the whole family thing and Santa being the most important person in this universe. The thing is, whether if you say that Lincoln's choice is just to get the multi-tour and nothing more when it comes to being placed on the nice list, this movie never tests Lincoln on being nice or just understanding his meaning that people aren't always nice 24/7. And when you have that in mind of how this movie plays out after watching Lincoln telling that to Duncan, then it just kind of shows that him being targeted just makes him learn that lesson out of realization, but mainly unfair realization when it comes to him being put into an unfair position. Like, as much as I understand that people think that the Loud family should all be flippers for this movie to work out, I still beg to differ considering of how much that Christmas just doesn't function right when it comes to its own rules in this movie. Now, before you say anything, yes, I'm aware that Lincoln isn't the only one who thinks that Santa shouldn't exist, in my point of view of my Christmas fanfic. And I understand that he is no different than his Loud family for thinking that. But on the other hand, if you're going to attempt to have the Loud family understand that Christmas is magical, although Santa exists, then at the very least, the point of view of Christmas when it comes to family and Lincoln being the only one, while just thinking about his gift, shouldn't be the answer to this movie, especially since that when they go to the North Pole, and honestly the most irony thing in all this is the fact that they can agree and accept anything basically from the North Pole, Bad Santa, Duncan when it comes to the waltzing, but when it comes to Lincoln, who is part of their family, and regardless of him causing the mess, they just don't treat him well. Even if I attempted to think that what Lincoln did is still a big factor, but the issue is that he instantly takes the entire blame, to where that him sharing the blame with Duncan and Santa would have saved this movie a bit, and I can instantly see that his greed could be a problem, but with him just instantly just being placed in the blame and nothing more, with how the Loud family are just accepting the North Pole and how it functions without getting any answers, it makes them less sympathetic. So, the fact that I'm supposed to see them viewing Christmas as a family thing, and when they just accept literally the database of the North Pole, all because that they think that Santa, Duncan, and the elves are really great people despite not knowing who Duncan is, unlike Lincoln, sums up a lot that this scene right here, when it comes to their disappointment, just really shows that they can't be able to think more about Lincoln other than his reckless choice. This is where the whole meaning of family backfires. Now, should have Lincoln gone to his sisters rather than just Lisa, Luann, and his parents? True, I can understand that he should have gone to them rather than helping people at Royal Woods, which, in all honesty, they could have made the bonding moments work. But on the other hand, when you have the idea that the Loud family only think good involving the North Pole and not knowing much about it, while Lincoln does, is really an indicator that they really aren't needed to come with Lincoln when it comes to going to the North Pole, to the point that if they actually stayed at Royal Worlds while Lincoln reverses everything on his own, I would say that it's probably fair for them to be sympathetic while also allowing Lincoln to take responsibility on his own. The ideals that they give the characters when it comes to Rita being into Ninja Turtles, along with Lisa being a huge star that is a huge indicator of them going to the North Pole and Lincoln changing the planet. I really feel like that they're supposed to give them more of a purpose, which in some cases they do, but at the same time, when they don't contribute on their relationship with Lincoln, and they just instantly just think of what Christmas should be when it comes to family, and they just don't do much with it, really sums up a lot that Lincoln carrying the entire movie for a third time makes their attributes wasted in this film. Like, after the song that Lincoln ruined, Clyde just instantly forgives him instantly, along with his family, especially since that we just see Lincoln just complimenting the Christmasing thing while Lin so agrees with him, as if they just think that the whole thing never happened. And I don't even think that them just wanting to forget what Lincoln did is a reality, considering that they instantly pick up the pieces immediately the moment Lincoln blurted out that he broke Christmas. Now, let's get back to Duncan. Now, it's one thing that this is his first time experiencing something outside of the North Pole, which is a reference to the elf movie where the main character, who's an elf, goes to the big city and experiencing stuff for the first time, which I can give credit to what credit is due when it comes to Duncan's character. But on the other hand, it doesn't really change the fact that his behavior and attitudes towards Lincoln is another indicator that him viewing humans black and white, and he just comes to this conclusion while only focusing on his Tinsel system, yes, I know what the database actually is called, really shows that his passion towards Christmas is just the Christmas theme itself and not really more centering around it, which it's one thing that it may be better than Lincoln's greed. It doesn't change the fact that with him relying on the data and not thinking for himself could be relatable. I mean, you can argue that you could relate to his character, but considering that we don't get much screen time of him and we barely get to see any development between him and Lincoln, really gives his character less credit than it should. Like, it's one thing that Duncan is only relying on the data, which makes him forget so many meanings involving what makes Christmas special, which I would instantly side with him on that. But on the other hand, if he had the task of actually viewing a specific person, namely Lincoln, throughout his entire life, and he actually gets so sick of the choices that he makes when it comes to being nice or naughty, the flipper thing would have actually worked, and throwing out the whole Tinsel system would probably give this movie more favors. The scene where Lincoln bribes Duncan would have been important if it wasn't the Tinsel system getting in the way. If it was all on Duncan's point of view and he views bribing as the most nice thing ever, then I can instantly side with him a little bit more. And I would see Lincoln's greed as an issue onto why he got landed on the naughty list. The whole Tinsel system is a showcase that if it's literally the main factor in all of this, and the Louts family aren't getting the ideals unlike Lincoln, you seriously can't expect me to believe that Lincoln is going to be an expert on this whole nice or naughty thing on his own if he stayed away from the North Pole network. You can argue all you want that stuff like this is a showcase that it makes a character human like Lincoln, but they did it poorly executed to the point that you just instantly think that they could have done it much more better than what we ended up getting. And when it comes to Lincoln's behavior in this movie, regardless of him being into the idea that Santa exists and the North Pole existing, it still doesn't factor his greed whatsoever, considering that when it comes to how he acts upon going to the North Pole, it literally had nothing to do with the multi-tour. Literally not at all. And when people address that he is like Tails from Sonic Lost Worlds, the difference is that Tails doesn't really agree with being in an alliance with Dr. Eggman, despite the fact that he had no other choice and did team up with him in previous games. When it comes to this, when it comes to Lincoln defending himself, it just really factors in that Lincoln is carrying the entire blame rather than having Duncan and Santa being part of the blame, which is a showcase of why that they're just hammering in on Lincoln being put in the ultimate wand, well, he isn't the only person in the wand. And at this point, I'm really getting sick and tired of the whole characters being selfish thing, even if it involves the other characters, because when that applies to Lincoln, it just hammers in that he is in the ultimate wand and he should think better when it comes to his family, when in reality, this movie isn't doing a good job on making family valued towards Lincoln, and just instantly just throw aside the whole Christmas fantasy elements and the whole database just to showcase Lincoln being in the most ultimate one. And honestly, the whole selfish criticism isn't really a thing when Lincoln has self-interest. Like, the fact that people just don't think about self-interest in this movie, since that the other characters do have self-interest, regardless of them not bragging about their self-interest, unlike Lincoln when it comes to the multi-tour. I wouldn't be surprised if they act later on after receiving coal, if it had nothing to do with Lincoln hacking into the North Pole network. They would feel the same way as what Lincoln would have felt if he didn't hack into the North Pole while not getting his multi-tour. Like, at this point, the movie depicting the Loud family in the positive light as flawless human beings is really an indicator that they just clearly don't even want Lincoln to have any relatability with his family when it comes to his self-interest, which in all honesty is something that this show keeps piling on so many times. I need to say this because it needs to be said. Lincoln's gift with Parkour's multi-tour is literally the best gift than any of the gifts the Loud sisters would have received. Even though that Lincoln's greed really got in the way of him being nice, but on the other hand, the fact that they actually made the multi-tour so much more to the point that you can instantly see that there was more of a reason onto why Lincoln reacted the way he did in the Gingerhausen song. It really makes me to believe that his greed is mostly on the database when it can't be able to consider the whole reason onto why Lincoln really wants a multi-tour, especially the fact that the multi-tour was being made at the North Pole. With this being the missed opportunity to showcase of how valuable the gifts are, but family is more important, and they just instantly botch those ideals up, really shows that the people at the North Pole aren't really understanding of what people think and how they react outside of their environment to, well, it just makes me believe that Christmas is more commercialism at the North Pole than it should when it comes to the multi-tour itself. Even though that some people would not look into those details, for me personally, the fact that I had to watch someone else's review of this movie to figure out these details really shows that regardless of Lincoln's behavior, it's honestly difficult to think that he would instantly ditch the whole multi-tour because of how it can do so much things, and the fact that it actually helped his family while facing off the gnarly versions of the North Pole. This is probably the closest way we're ever going to see the Loud family be fully adjusted to Lincoln's hobby, since in the last movie they had no other solution due to the state that they were in. Even if you can say that they would forget what they did in this movie if their memories never got wiped, you have to admit that Lincoln's multi-tour is the source reason of them surviving the battle at the North Pole, because without the multi-tour, they would have been sitting ducks. If this movie didn't tick me off that much, I would have seen this as another positive, alongside with Luna's reaction of Lincoln being turned into a gingerbread, which I will discuss as well. All I can say is that when it comes to how the multi-tour functions and how it will have benefit the family to see onto why Lincoln really wants one, would have been another opportunity to showcase the family values if it wasn't really weakly executed too well. It literally shoehorns in the family message regardless of them having less screen time, despite with attributes that would have been better off if it was factored into Lincoln's relationship with them. And don't even get me started on Clyde's sign with Lincoln's family when it comes to him botching the song, because literally in the following scene, he just acts completely unaware of what actually happened, despite the fact that he's supposed to let Lincoln know that family is the whole meaning of the song rather than gifts. Seriously, when you look back at clips in this movie and see what they contribute more when they're not really are due to one scene leading up to another, you really feel like that this whole Lincoln greed and not him learning about family really makes the whole song even less valuable or entertaining if you side with the Loud sisters and parents. There is no other way you can convince me that that song will ever get any better if more people pick up these details. And this is yet another missed opportunity when it comes to Lincoln's dynamic with Duncan. For the most part, when Duncan relies on the data too much and not thinking about the person's greed and not understanding the value of the item itself, it just really makes the whole Christmas message difficult to take face value, knowing full well that they legitimately make the whole North Pole a Christmas commercialized facility, even though it's supposed to be more than that. The movie's ending when it comes to Santa and Duncan is supposed to indicate that a person like Lincoln can change their hearts, which is supposed to be a good ending when it comes to the North Pole characters, but on the other hand, with how poorly written everything is, it still wasn't on, along with Lincoln's family's ending when they get their gifts. Like, that's really the thing that when it comes to the other side of Lincoln, when it comes to him being nice, while switching back to his naughty traits, with the whole Tinsel system not really indicating what a person is when it comes to who they are in general. And really, the message itself just feels a little too difficult to take at face value or value of its own, with how that the movie really does a poor job of showcasing of the true meaning of Christmas, all the while Lincoln learning a lesson when it comes to being with his family, despite the fact that with how it was executed, it really feels like that he is still taking it at face value, but at the same time, the gift was way more bigger to the point that it's just too difficult for him to reconsider. for the most part, when Lincoln is so into his gift, all the while not blaming himself for what he caused, really, I can't even think that those elements really work, judging of how that they just can't be able to make Christmas work right in this movie compared to how it was done better in not only 11 Hours of Leaving towards the fight before Christmas, but also Season's cheating, since no one got into Lincoln's way. He did the whole gift swapping on his own, and the consequences that he gets really feels justified to the point that the ending that he had with Lily really makes it worthwhile in a capacity. Plus, when it comes to Duncan's passion in Christmas, wouldn't he understand that the gifts are more valuable to the kids than he thinks, and the fact that he has to rely on the Tinsel when it comes to nice or naughty traits that he just instantly not understand onto why Christmas has gifts in the first place? Like, it's one thing that you're gonna have to make the message of there was more than getting in the Christmas season, since that it's all about giving. However, it doesn't really change the fact that with how Duncan just can't be able to rely on the opinions of himself and only relying on the Tinsel itself, it just makes it even more depressing that anyone will probably accept the formula of the North Pole system rather than the actual reason behind it. And the whole Christmas time continuum thing, honestly, my original critiques is that what's the point of Santa using his reindeers? Like, we never seen Santa going around the North Pole, not really around the North Pole, but around the planet to send gifts, and I'm assuming that it's mainly from his magic. But as it turns out, it was actually the multi-tours that lifted his sled in the final minutes of this movie. The thing is that when I think about these details and when I think of how Santa functions and the less we know about him when it comes to details like these, I'm supposed to view him as a really important person, but after critiquing him in my villains video, it's still difficult to take what Lincoln said towards Lori legitimately naughty. That's really the thing that when it comes to how this show's way of doing Santa functions. Really thinking about Lincoln's selfishness and just by thinking of his death when it comes to other people's opinions, that it's a way of making him sympathetic, but it just makes him worse. As much as I say it's that the meaning of death is so meaningless in this show when it comes to my villains video, I wouldn't be surprised if they had that criticism towards the other characters if they took Lincoln's position, including Lola, Lynn, Lisa, and Luann. In Stream Team's WK's review of this movie, he states that his death was really poorly executed due to his selfishness, in comparison to his character from No Time to Spy. At times, I can understand that's his opinion and I can't change his opinion, but with that in mind, with how Lincoln was written in this movie and the fact that people say that his death is unsympathetic, honestly, they are literally ignoring literally everything else, and the blame that Lincoln gets in this movie is too extreme. I can't deny that what Lincoln did by hacking into the North Pole is just for him to be on the nice list and nothing more. But on the other hand, when it comes to the whole Tinsel system being a factor in all this, I can't even imagine what this movie would have been like if it had nothing to do with the database whatsoever and the elves taking full control. Because I can guarantee you that if they witnessed Lincoln switching himself to the nice list, they will have put him back onto the naughty list. And with this whole naughty North Pole taking the majority of the development from the main characters, it really gives me the belief that they clearly don't even know how to handle Lincoln work as a flipper. And even though that we may have details when it comes to outside of this movie, specifically in the episodes, it still feels like that looking at this movie on its own is really set into an alternative universe. Well, none of that really matters, especially when it comes to the other characters who have done much more worse than Lincoln. The thing is that when it comes to Lincoln's death, it instantly makes me think that they just don't even know how to make his character better by improving him in different ways, instead of just using death as the answer to everything. I'll admit that while I wasn't on board with his death in No Time to Spy, at least it had meaning towards it. And when it comes to the meaning in this movie, they really don't even know how to cooperate the characters better when it comes to having better writing. And I will say that Duncan's reaction when it comes to him witnessing that Lincoln saved his life from being turned into a gingerbread would have been more impactful if he got more screen time along with Lincoln. Even though it's in favor of Lincoln's bond with his family, I pretty much understand onto why Duncan gave him a gift after the events of Santa wiping everyone else's memories except Lincoln, Duncan, and himself. And I still don't even understand onto why fans stated that Lincoln still doesn't deserve a gift for ruining Christmas. You see, the thing is, if it was just from Santa and not from him and Duncan, it would have made sense. But at the same time, with this being the first time that Duncan witnessed someone saving his life, I have to admit that it actually works. It's just that it's been wasted in this moment due to the poor writing. With little screen time he gets along with his dynamic with Lincoln, him not showing his blame, all the while not getting called out for it, while Lincoln gets most of the blame while his family just praise Duncan and Santa when it comes to Christmas activity. Really, there's just so many different ways to make this work, and this just isn't one of them. And honestly, you can't expect me to believe that I would probably accept Christmas for what it is, for how it functions. With that being said, after addressing the dynamic of Lincoln and Duncan, Duncan's character more, and Lincoln's greed towards the multi-tour, I'm gonna be doing something nice, no pun intended from the title of this movie. I made a community post while I addressed the Loud sisters, specifically Luna, Lucy, Lana, or Lori and Lenny, which I do include the two together if they were the protagonists, and I've addressed it, and someone addressed it to me that it just made Duncan more of a joke. Specifically, the Luna story and the Lori and Lenny story. So I decided to do my own predictions of what Lincoln should have been written in this movie, along with his dynamic with Duncan. So here we go. If I'm willing to keep Lincoln's obsession with the multi-tour, and it got in his way of family values, I would have him hang out with the other characters, specifically his sisters, and they get really annoyed the amount of times that he keeps bringing up the multi-tour. If I want to include the Gingerhausen song, Lincoln should have ruined the song at the end instead of the majority of it, leading up to the build-up of the frustration from his sisters. When it comes to Duncan's introduction, have no database involved, no Tinsel, and actually allow him to view Lincoln on his own when it comes to observing him. And when it comes to him being judgmental, don't make him selfish. After witnessing Lincoln's sisters just reaching the breaking point by just abandoning him when all he thinks about is his gift. This leads to Duncan seeing the full truth, which leads to Lincoln witnessing Duncan for the first time, and Duncan tells him that he's officially on the naughty list for being greedy. But with Duncan giving Lincoln a chance, we can still have the scenes of Lincoln attempting to be nice only to backfire, and they will have made these much more better with this execution. And as Duncan is considered of coming back to the North Pole, Lincoln follows Duncan without him knowing, and he heads into one of the rooms in the North Pole headquarters to change his name from Naughty to the Nice list. And with Duncan figuring this out, we get the chase scene similar from the actual movie, but with Duncan chasing Lincoln. And with a huge mistake that happened, the whole list of naughty or nice have been flipped. If I want to put this on a smaller scale, just Royal Woods. Like, if the naughty or nice system had locations on Earth, and the elves are focusing on those locations, and it ended up being the list that Lincoln messed up, that's honestly more than enough. Which means, for the love of God, we're keeping the naughty North Pole situation out of it entirely. Santa and the elves refused to take Lincoln back home for what he caused, and they ordered him to do good deeds in the North Pole while also teaching him the meaning of Christmas. And when it comes to the Loud family, as much as this would still be the third time that they would be misused, they would still be seen as a sympathetic light than how they were in the movie, since that they actually gain development by calling out Lincoln on his obsessive behavior. Despite my version of the plot still makes Lincoln out of character, at the very least, it would have made more sense, and I can easily see that rooting against him is really accurate compared to the actual film. And I understand that it would probably make the movie difficult to enjoy, with it not being a Christmas movie that people would expect from the Loud House. I attempted to make this movie work when it comes to the actual film's rules, like with the fantasy elements and the entire existence of Santa and the North Pole. As much as I really wish that this movie should have been something else entirely, if I'm willing to take this movie's rules seriously when it comes to doing the prediction out of it, honestly, my prediction of Lincoln's plot is literally the best of what I can come up with. As for Lincoln and Duncan's dynamic, when they're close with each other when it comes to Lincoln picking up the pieces with him just learning the true meaning of Christmas, it actually makes Duncan more in the right and more likable, and he actually sees something in Lincoln that really showcases the type of kid that he is. And with him being the first kid that he witnessed, mainly human being, then I would say for a fact that this dynamic would have actually benefited the movie a lot more, despite not being in favor of Lincoln's bond with his family. Even though that it is a shame that Lincoln's family would still be shafted regardless of how the plot functions, at the very least, I'm going to assume that if they did come along to the North Pole and they witnessed Lincoln doing the deeds, they would just normalize the idea that Santa and the North Pole exist, which is one of the issues of the actual film, which I don't want to bring up again. I can't really think of the ending, especially including Lincoln's death, which is probably pointless with how the story functions in my point of view, so when it comes to the ending itself, will they see more of Lincoln's character and who he is truly capable of? They may have second thoughts of giving them his very own multi-tour. Truth be told, it's debatable if people may agree with my predictions on that type of ending, but at the same time, the actual film, despite Lincoln's sacrifice being unsympathetic towards some people, at least it feels sympathetic towards Duncan onto why he gave Lincoln the gift. Okay, aside from the AU fanfics that I'm going to be doing with the third one coming along the way, hopefully there was nothing else I can say about Naughty or Nice for real. This movie alone really gave me a lot of thinking than it should, which really says a lot compared to the previous Loud House movies. And with this movie reaching a year old by the end of this year, honestly, it's better for me to skip it entirely while focusing on the show's 10th anniversary, even though I'm pretty sure that celebrating the show after 10 years is still a good accomplishment, but when it comes to the quality of the show itself, that's a different story. To give credit where credit is due, this movie at least made me invested to watch The Loud House again while doing those video projects, the romance and shipping video and the toxic video. But on the other hand, I can't even say for a fact that this movie made me appreciate this show more, judging of how that this movie just breaks literally everything, and it's difficult to look at this movie on its own. Every time I think of something from this film, it always brings material of making a video out of. And with me being highly critical of this movie, this really feels like no such luck. Well, back then, if this movie came out, I'm pretty sure that people would easily be confused. But on the other hand, they would probably accept the fantasy elements since that it was part of the earlier seasons, rather than just season 5 and onwards. This movie isn't like No Such Luck, Brawl in the Family, or any of the terrible episodes, since that it came just recently with how people are just fed up with the negativity of the Loud House episodes that really affected their experiences. But when I came across Naughty or Nice, it really showcases of what I would have felt if I was with those people who've watched the show from the very beginning back in 2016, and when we enter into season 4, that's where literally everything falls flat. Sometimes Loud House fans, when they give up on the show, it's always for multiple reasons, and while I still didn't give up on this show after this movie, it was still a breaking point. That thinking about this movie before it airs in the weeks of November, honestly, that kind of sums up a lot onto why people are so invested into me talking about Loud House material. Well, back then, I was really burned out from the show. So, I would say that I will attempt to make those Loud House videos a reality with the romance and shipping video in line, and I am considering on doing a couple of Loud House episode comparisons, with a new one coming on Friday with one of the newer episodes premiering in America. With that being said, I will still make other videos that aren't Loud House related, but at the same time, it's still going to be difficult to commit to that since I'm getting really stressed out into doing those videos, which really shows that my style back then on making multiple videos off of multiple shows have been wearing me out more recently. So when it comes to current projects, Summerpalooza 6x3 Marathon, that's gonna be on hold, sadly. And when it comes to other fanfics, with me focusing on The Loud House, that's probably going to be on hold, judging of what I'm feeling right now. So the only critique that I have left for this film is when Bad Santa's song takes place and he stated that he thanks Lincoln for turning the entire planet naughty, and then Lincoln replied, "That wasn't part of the plan." It's supposed to be irony towards his behavior from the Ginger Housen song where he didn't get the idea, and Bad Santa is doing the same thing. Except the difference is that the Ginger House song was about family and not greed, and truth be told, the Santa song had nothing to do with greed whatsoever, and it's only about naughtiness. The fact that they can't be able to make that connection work when it comes to Lincoln's character in this says a lot that they have less focus on anything and just puts the entire movie on white noise than anything. So the only thing I can wrap up, a pun not intended again, is that I am planning to do a Loud Tales Christmas fanfic, and I'm planning on publishing chapters for my Patreon tier loyal people, and just to let you know, it didn't came from this movie, other than the background, which is literally one of the only pluses of doing a fanfic cover, of doing a fanfiction off of your favorite characters. So all I can say is that the purpose of Lenny's Passionate Christmas Kiss Boy is to make sure that Lenny does it on her own without anything Christmas magical related, since Santa, the North Pole, and the elves don't exist in this head canon. It's honestly for the best, and really, I am going to address more about the purpose of this fanfic in my romance and shippings video once I get to the Lenny section, because as far as I'm concerned, this is honestly more appealing than basically anything thinking about the North Pole if it was done right. As rude as it sounds, it's still the truth. I'll see you guys next time.